Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and this is a rather important follow-up video in regards to the other videos I've made recently on the topic of medieval archery. You see, those videos are being met with a great amount of positivity, which is really encouraging, but there is a minority of skeptics who are, vehemently disagreeing to the point of promoting flat-out lies about this thing to discredit the style and even discredit me as well, and those things really need to be addressed. Now, some of you have said, why even bother responding to critics? And my answer is, sometimes makes great videos. But also, I do want to clear up the misconceptions that these critics are spreading. Because this minority in the archery community, and I need to emphasize this, it is a minority, okay? And they represent the community very poorly, because most people I've interacted with about historical archery, everything have been awesome and they're really interested in stuff. And even if they disagree, they're happy to disagree amicably and at least represent both sides of the argument fairly. And it's this minority that needs to be exposed basically for what they're doing and the lies that they're trying to spread about it. And they're not just trolls either. Some of them are more prominent members of the archery community with larger voices, and others are people who are well respected with a lot of experience under their belt. So in addition to those reasons as to why I'm making this video, it also reveals a rather insidious kind of side to, I guess, the archery community, but I think it applies more broadly, and it speaks about the notion, the idea of elitism and gatekeeping, and how people resort to belittling other people's kind of ideas and experimentation just in a very mean-spirited way that chase people away from their community. They literally harm their community with their own behavior. There's been a lot of people who've actually reached out to me sharing with me that they've lost interest in archery because they were told that they were doing it the wrong way and they shouldn't do it the way that they started doing instinctually, which is actually shooting on the right. And there's a strict way, and all this authoritarianism, elitism, gatekeeping, stuff like that has just served to drive people away from the interest. It's very unfortunate, and it should be exposed because it is extreme in some areas. I know from personal experience, so I need to share it with you and also address the lies. So, what are the lies that people have been spreading? Well, one of the largest responses, has been, no one ever said that, shooting on the right was impossible, so stop trying to straw man the situation, when, no, people literally have been saying it's impossible. I've shared direct quotes in my own video, and they weren't just trolls. Some of them were people who have a lot of experience, and I'll share a large example from one of the larger critics. Now, there's no point beating around the bush. One of the larger skeptics in regards to the response to my videos is NUsensei. We have a bit of a history, but Nu has actually been one of the more respectful critics in response to this. Some of the other people have been just downright derogatory and belittling, or they can't even propose a solid argument and they resort to name-calling and ridicule, okay? So it actually happens, and again, I'll show you examples of this. Longbow has this awesome video where he tests this for himself, and a follow-up one where he tests it with a bit of speed shooting, and it's just great. And then, of course, you have Armin, who shows different techniques to make it more effective. You have the videos by Thrand. His follow-up one is great, where he actually shows that he can draw it back further with this style on the right than compared to on the left. These are brilliant videos. I'll also link the ones that I am rebutting. Please don't attack Nu personally. If you have issues with his arguments like I do, attack his arguments, okay? Not him personally. Let's keep it as respectful as we can, because Nu has been respectful far more so than other people who have been trying to challenge my recent videos. But before I get to NUsensei and share a bit of the history, because we actually have been getting along much better recently than in the past, and also to correct some of the timeline confusion people are having in regards to that, let me just kind of share some of the examples of what has been happening among certain circles. For instance, Thane Thrand, he reached out to me, he was interested in this style and wanted to do a collaboration video. I thought that was a great idea, where he tested it himself, and then he shared it with a prominent Longbow Facebook group. And their responses were pathetic. People saying this is literally the dumbest SHIT crap I've ever seen people do with a bow. That's not an argument, okay? That's just an insult. And it is actually disregarding the valid evidence Thrand was proposing in it. Then they would just misrepresent. Some people were saying, why would you want to try this when you're just the string is gonna hit your arm every time you shoot it? When, yeah, the string hit Thrand's arm once, but not any other time in his demonstrations. And they completely ignored my contribution in that video where it never hit my arm, and yet people were literally representing this style of archery that it's going to inherently always hit, slap your forearm if you try it, which is absolute bullcrap. It's completely false, all right? And by the way, the string hits your arm quite a lot when you shoot the conventional way with the arrow on the other side. And so by their logic, that should invalidate that style of archery too, and you shouldn't even bother that. So no, it's complete bullcrap, but that's what they latched onto. So why would they say something that is so demonstrably false regarding this method? This comment here gives a timestamp saying, all I need to see, trying to say that because the string hit Thran's arm once, that proved this style was flawed. It's all utter and complete garbage. It's not true. Seriously, it's like people see this new style as a threat to their own credibility because they have either said it's impossible or wrong or flawed in previous circumstances, and now they feel that any validity to it is a threat to their credibility, so they are looking for anything at all that they can latch onto to try and disprove it, no matter how disingenuous or flawed. Being willing to fully misrepresent the facts and the evidence that has been shown. And they do this in multiple instances where they take one small thing here or there, which is not representative of the whole style at all, and then inflate it trying to say that this is an inherent problem. It's pathetic, and it shows such a profound confirmation bias that these people are not approaching this honestly. They of course tried to disregard the validity of medieval artwork, saying that you shouldn't really take it seriously because there are silly things in medieval artwork, which is the same argument you heard over and over, and I already addressed in my video, which shows they didn't even watch my full video, but this was in response to Thran's one, so granted. So when seeing that, and seeing the way that they were treating Thran's video and work like that, I entered into the fray, and I was a bit cheeky, admittedly, because I was meeting their level of respect that they were showing, but I didn't call anyone names. I attacked arguments, and I attacked them aggressively, and oh boy did they not like that, especially the admin. And by the way, this is a public Facebook group, so I'm not doxing anyone by sharing these things, right? The admin, Ian Coote, couldn't stand being challenged, and we argued back and forth, quite extensively on a number of different topics, and his arguments degenerated into basically, no, you're stupid, I'm right because of experience, and you're a condescending tit, an idiot, and a joke, and other things like that. Like, that's what he was calling me. And I told him to grow up because he was behaving like a child, and I said his arguments were pathetic, but I never called him a name specifically. But still, because I was arguing with him, and what's interesting, after, Thran's post, I actually posted a question to just the people in the community because some of them had really good things to share, and if they've got good things to share, I want to learn it. And so I posted a perfectly respectable, new comment thing, completely separate, but of course, good old Ian, he came in swinging, saying, pull your head in or you're going to get banned. And I didn't do anything, challenge anyone. I was just asking, and I was like, hang on, why are you coming in here acting like that? I'm actually being quite respectful. I can show you the comment thread here because, he's deleted it, by the way, and since then also banned me from the group because he has such thin skin. It's amazing. And this is the type of authoritarian, elitist gatekeepers that exist in some of the communities, and the example being the archery community, where they can't, tackle the debate honestly, or not willing to, or just don't have much experience in debate. And so that was a bit of fun, but it reveals an unfortunate reality. But what does deserve to be done is for me to address their criticisms and objections and arguments as honestly as I wish they would have addressed my own. And one of the best examples of someone who has put forward basically most of the arguments that he repeated is NUsensei in one of his recent videos. And by addressing that video, I'll really be addressing most of the criticisms that were raised in the Facebook page and other areas around the internet and stuff, because a lot of people have actually been parroting what Nu has tried to establish in his own video. But before I get into that, I do need to share some of the timeline because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what went really down between me and Nu in the past. A long time ago, I made a video about archery. Nu did a response that I felt most of his criticisms were invalid and taking me out of context. I shared that in a comment. That upset him. He was offended by what I was saying in the comment because he got so much wrong. I actually felt that it felt like he was purposefully trying to misrepresent what I was saying or not look for the truth in what I was saying and only look for where there was errors. And he really took offense at that, and he proceeded to make 2 additional videos where it was basically targeting me, attacking me.
I have an unhealthy dislike of Shadiversity.
And really taking me out of context even further. And I had not made a reply video until that 3rd video where I had had enough, and because I was being attacked unfairly, and so I made my infamous reply video where I was calling him an idiot or a troll in the title. Now, the interesting thing about that, most people who watched the video and saw the evidence I was proposing, guess what? They saw that I was completely in the rights of my response. And you know who else has agreed with that? Nu himself, okay? He apologized. He apologized to me and has admitted my response was valid and that he was in the wrong. And this is what he said to me, because since then we've actually been sending emails privately, and I'll get to that as a bit of a story, and this video is going to be going into a lot of depth here, so buckle in, get popcorn, because it's going to be a long one, right? So this is what Nu said to me in the email, and by the way, he's already been quoting these emails in public forums already, so he set the standard that it's perfectly fine to share this in a public context. And he said this: the actions around the idiot or troll video were understandable. It did become personal. I admit that I was inadvertently twisting your content, taking it out of context and using it for my agenda. So when it was clear that I was in the wrong, I remedied that. Likewise, your video was also a personal attack, and I think it was warranted, and you were right to react negatively and aggressively to what I did. Okay, and that's from Nu himself. And so that matter has been settled because I accepted his apology, I took down my video, Nu actually took down the videos who was misrepresenting me, and that was it. And seriously, Nu deserves credit for having admitted he was wrong and apologizing. It was a very mature thing that he did. My response was perfectly appropriate to what Nu had been saying about me, which he has agreed with. Okay, so that's done. Now we are at this new kind of evolution, okay? And I am not making this as a personal attack. I'm attacking his arguments and logic because I vehemently disagree and feel he has misrepresented, not purposefully, but really misrepresented some things and inadvertently lied about other things as well. Inadvertently, okay? I'm not trying to ascribe malice to his actions here. So I made my more recent archery video, Secrets of the Medieval Longbow, and Nu made a pretty darn flawed on so many levels Reddit post in regards to it. And nearly everything he was saying was incorrect in this Reddit post. Now, that really annoyed me because I can't stand people misrepresenting my actions, what I believe, and he didn't misrepresent me on to nearly as a large level as previously, but he was certainly false in many of his criticisms. And I could have made a reply video then, ripping that Reddit post apart as it deserved. But this is the thing, alright? I actually don't like YouTube drama, alright? I don't like harming other people's lives or causing stress or anything like that. I'm entitled to, if they're attacking me, I'm perfectly entitled to defend my own credibility, okay? And so if people actually don't want someone to defend their credibility, don't engage in the first place. And if Nu was correct in his, this Reddit post in criticizing me and attacking me, it would just build his credibility if he could prove it. But he couldn't. In fact, most of his claims could be outrightly disproven so categorically. And so instead of making a reply video, I sent him an email, okay? And that launched off a fairly lengthy email exchange back and forth where we tried to bury the hatchet, resolve some of the issues, and we got to a fairly good place. Now, I'm wondering if I should actually release that email exchange so everyone can understand the context and what we talked about. Nu has already published parts of this email exchange in public forums online, specifically Facebook groups and stuff, and so he set the standard that he's perfectly fine with it being shared, and I think it would help to give everyone the context of how things developed. Because I really address the Reddit post in these exchanges and prove to him fairly strongly that so much of what he said was completely incorrect. And it was like pulling teeth, but he grudgingly admitted I had a point in certain areas. And so what you need to understand, my more popular video, Doing the Impossible in Medieval Archery, was actually a subtle reply to Nu's Reddit post. debunking and contradicting all the attacks that he was making against me, but I didn't mention his name because I didn't want to send any hate his way. So then, why am I doing it now? Well, Nu is continually engaging in the discussion, making videos that are clearly, responses to myself and others as well, not just myself, but everyone who's been watching them knows that these are responses to myself, and it's gotten to the point where the information he's been presenting is so categorically wrong, it deserves a direct video to debunk these misconceptions thoroughly and completely. And in the email exchange, that's exactly what I said, okay? If he's wanting to, engage in debate, I'm going to respond, all right? That's just what happens. Now, again, it's not a personal thing, and Nu has been very respectful in his videos, has even avoided mentioning me at all, even though it's obvious they are in response to me. He even quotes me on several times throughout many of these videos. But I want to thank Nu for being very respectful, not making it personal, and that's what the purpose of this video is, even though I will be attacking his arguments aggressively. See, there's a lot of contradictions in this video Nu has made. He's made a statement like this.
I want to remind people that we're here to progress a discussion. I'm not here to argue who is right and who is wrong. Now, I don't want to stop you specifically from experimenting. It's something that can be done. You want to try and make it work, then feel free to do so. I'm not going to dictate what is and isn't archery.
But that is directly contradicted by the content of the video, where he says stuff like this.
We can say with a high degree of certainty that this is the correct way to shoot a longbow, and that there is no practical reason why someone would choose to shoot the opposite way with a Mediterranean draw.
That really does seem to be dictating what is and isn't archery, specifically historical medieval archery in this context. Now, of course, he admits in other parts of the video that, sure, some random person probably tried this some other time, but then he so vehemently says that this is not a thing, historically, and perhaps his meaning prevalently. But that is dictating what he thinks is and isn't archery in the historical context. So there's so many contradictions, and this is just, I see like the beginning one of it.
I object to the use of the term impossible draw. That's been being used a lot recently. Firstly, it's not an impossible draw. It is possible. I can do it, other people can do it, and we certainly didn't break any laws of time and space to do so. So it is possible to physically execute this technique. So when people are saying that it's impossible, I don't think people are actually saying it is physically impossible in any way. What they may be saying is that it may be impossible to do it well.
So these statements I really feel are very dishonest, whether it was on purpose or inadvertently. I'm not trying to make aspersions into his intentions here, but they're very dishonest because it's in direct contradiction to what Nu said himself on the matter. Look at what he said in the Reddit post. He said, this style cannot be done, all right? Now, he's trying to say that he meant it cannot be done effectively. That's not what he wrote, okay? It is very clear. Also, it is very easy to understand the broader context in the way that is speaking. He is meaning it very categorically in the way that this was written in the Reddit post. He is one of the most prominent people that said this was impossible. And so the assertion that no one is saying it was impossible and that he never had that opinion is categorically wrong.
So when people are saying that it's impossible, I don't think people are actually saying it is physically impossible in any way.
And what you need to understand, in the context of the original Reddit post, he was saying that you can't even draw the arrow on the right without it falling off most of the time. He said it cannot be done, let alone shooting accurately and effectively. He was one of the most prominent ones saying you simply can't even draw it. That's the whole purpose of my video, doing the impossibility of archery, was proving this statement wrong and many others. Just by lifting the thumb, you can hold it on very easily, but you don't even need the thumb up to be able to do it regularly, reliably with the arrow on the shaft, as I'll dive into a bit later on in this video. And what's really interesting and somewhat disappointing is that Nu himself later has said that this is a perfectly viable technique in one of his later videos.
What does this conclude? Well, it's a functional technique. I can make it work, and at 10 meters it seemed to be just as accurate with what I was using at what I was shooting at.
But he never said that I was wrong or that I had said it wasn't or anything like that. He's just flipped on it and made no correction at all. And this video where he is, stating and proclaiming so vehemently that it's now not impossible, but less effective and not as good as the other way, is still up, still misleading people. And that's the disappointing side to it, because if now he does admit that this is a viable shooting method, well, I think it would be appropriate to try and correct the record a bit, or at least admit in that video when he says it's viable to say, yeah, so I was misinformed when I was saying that it was less effective. Because the purpose of this video is not to say it's impossible, but he endeavors very strongly to try and establish that it is nowhere near as effective as the conventional way, that there are inherent problems that will cause, it's a risk to injury, you have greater chances of injuring yourself shooting this way than other ways, okay? And also that there is no historical evidence for it. He actually says that. So we're going to get to it.
If we're making a straw man argument, which people aren't actually saying, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of this discussion. So the question shouldn't be whether it's possible, but why is one method preferred over the other?
And so the claim saying that people said that this was an impossible style of archery is a straw man argument is just blatantly bullcrap, because he was one of the very ones who was saying it.
Why is one method preferred over the other? Or to be bolder, why is one method used and the other isn't? This
is also another very disingenuous thing to say, because it's completely false, okay? It's another one of those lies, and again, I'm not saying you're saying it purposefully, but it is false. It's a lie, okay? That no one shoots this way, when there's a lot of people do it. Hundreds of people have reached out to me and shared it with me. Look at the comment section of my Impossible Archery video, and you will see so many people saying, I've shot like this for years upon years. One of the comments here with the Mediterranean grip specifically on the right side. And so to say that the left-sided or inside Mediterranean shooting method is used and the other is not is just wrong. It's false. It is used, myself included. And so it's a very disingenuous way to try and establish that one is just universally accepted as the better way to do it. But what really seems to be the case in many archery circles is that that idea is accepted, that there is a superior method and all other methods are inferior. And that's when they're actually willing to acknowledge that people do shoot the other way, which it doesn't seem like Nu is willing to establish or contextualize in the very video he's making here. But there is a more traditional or conventional method for shooting with a Mediterranean grip, and that is with the arrow on the left side. Why is that? In my opinion, competitive, stationary, target archery. You see, when the chances of winning a tournament versus losing is the distance of like that much, okay, and getting that much closer to center bullseye, pinpoint accuracy becomes far, far more important. And to achieve that level of pinpoint accuracy, in my opinion, I actually think you can achieve it easier with the arrow on the left side. And you need to sight the arrow. So this is an instinctive shooting. This is sighting down the arrow and lining it up with the target to get that level of pinpoint accuracy. But the question is that the level of accuracy that was considered good and standard in the medieval period? And honestly, no. It wasn't. One of the reasons being, even if you're trying to shoot the kind of target archery style with the arrow on the left in the medieval period, especially in a warfare situation, the arrows were not properly spined and weighted to the draw weights of the bow. They were manufactured on a large scale, and they were put onto wagons, everything when they're going into war, and they were issued to the archers, and they weren't weighted to the bows. Now, it turns out that on the higher poundages, spine of the arrow matters less, and this is, me trying to get information from people who have experience in the field, and the consensus was generally it matters less when you're shooting a half-inch arrow that's a lot heavy and stuff like that. What matters more and impacts accuracy is the weight of the arrow. But what that means is there is kind of a roof or a cap to the best levels of accuracy you can achieve when shooting a traditional historical medieval way. And you can attain the standard level of accuracy very well with shooting on the right as opposed to the left. What really changes the mix-up is when you throw in stationary target archery and you need even more precision, the most amount of precision you can actually get out of it. It's not to say you can't get insanely precise when shooting on the right. Lars Anderson has already shown this very clearly with his demonstration. So it is a very, very accurate style, but is it the best for stationary target archery? Probably not. It's my opinion, but I think that answers it very adequately, and it helps contextualize certain claims about the traditional method. We are doing it this way because it's the best way argument, which Nu does bring up later on, because that is only in reflection to a very specific set of parameters that is more commonly reflected in modern day Olympic style target archery. In regards to medieval war archery, shooting on the right, so far, especially from my own experimentation and experimentations of others, is not only very effective, but has certain inherent advantages to it as well. Because this is the thing, if shooting with the Mediterranean grip on the right side went out of practice because it was less effective than other methods, it should be less effective when we test it in the real world. And that's not what we're finding. That's not what I'm finding. That's not what Mead Longbows is finding, or Armin, or Thrand, or Lars Anderson, is that when you try this style in the more accurate context of the historical period, it is just as effective as shooting on the left side, and the argument that it went out of favor because of this, actual context is invalid. It only becomes more appropriate when you change the parameters and restrict it down to modern day target archery, that there might be some validity to that, and then we can understand why right-sided shooting perhaps went out of favor in practice.
Well, archery was more common in this historical time period. We can't assume that the artists necessarily were familiar with the intimacies and the intricacies of archery, just by virtue of living that time period.
This is such a flawed argument, okay? It's a straw man and it moves the goalposts all in one. Because why are you assuming that artists are not familiar with the intimate intricacies of archery? And in addition to that, this is the straw man side of things, I never said that they were. I said that it was more likely that they would be, based on the fact that archery was more prevalent in the medieval period as for recreation, for warfare, and for hunting. It is more likely that the artists of the medieval period were familiar with archery. And by the way, it's very disingenuous to just try and dismiss all the artistic sources when we have so much of them, and it's like saying they're all idiots, okay?
After all, we all live in a time period today where most of us drive around in cars, but we probably can't accurately draw a car.
Nu's example of the car is ridiculous because you take most people in the modern world, okay, and if they're not mentally handicapped in some way, they would be able to accurately draw a car. More specifically, they would know which side the steering wheel is on in the car depending on which country they came from. And so you're defeated in logic by your own argument, because how could you think that most modern people wouldn't know how to draw a car, for crying out loud? And I'm talking about the most fundamental yet important characteristics that define a car to be what it looks like. Does it have 4 wheels? Where are the doors placed on the car? Where are the windows? Is there a bonnet? And which side is the steering wheel on? Could they depict this well? Well, of course, that depends on their artistic skill, but could they depict it accurately? Most adult people? Of course they could! And it's also insulting to medieval artists, just trying to dismiss them as all being, misinformed and stuff like that. I had artists respond to me in comments to my last video saying that they were insulted as well because as an artist, they endeavor to depict things accurately. And what, you think medieval artists didn't actually get people to pose for their artworks? Or that they didn't work off real-world references? I mean, come on, it's just very disingenuous.
Many of these art pieces are not intended to be and are never meant to be seen as accurate depictions of the subject matter.
Not intending to be accurate depictions? How on earth do you know that? That is totally applying a preconceived bias on the source material. You have no way to know that. It's just a complete assumption. There is another massive flaw to what Nu is trying to say and imply by what he's saying here, because he might be referring to the fact that many medieval artists actually depicted past events according to what they understood as a modern setting, modern to their time, and so they depicted the past events with the fashion style, technology levels, architectural styles of their time period, the artist's time period. For instance, this depiction of the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian does exactly that. The event actually happened sometime between the year 256 to 288 AD, yet this scene clearly depicts a late medieval, early Renaissance time period. What Nu is implying by his statement is that because the artist wasn't depicting the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, that time period accurately, that he wasn't trying to depict his own time period accurately, which is complete bull, and how would he know that? How could he try and assume that the artist is not trying to depict the fashion, the architectural style, and the archery accurate to what he understood from his own time period?
What we do need is to corroborate these sources with other sources which we can more firmly establish to be credible. And for that, we have written sources. We don't have an extensive record of manuals and treatises from most of the medieval period, but we do have sources which date from the late medieval period.
Alright, so this one is again really important because he says he has written sources that date from the late medieval period, yet the earliest source he lists comes from 1515. That's the 16th century. That's after the medieval period. The medieval period ended at the end of the 15th century. So you don't list a single source that comes from the medieval period. And you actually say you have written sources coming from that period. That's not accurate or true. And on top of that, with the earliest two sources that you bring, you misinterpret and misrepresent what is actually being said, and I will prove it.
Most of these sources don't just clearly outright say that you have to put the arrow on this side.
But you're using these sources as if they do outright say. I mean, you say it in a broader context and then more specifically later on that this is evidence to how they shot in the medieval period when these sources don't even come from the medieval period.
What we can conclude from this is that the assumption that longbow shooters shot from the left side or the near side of the bow is not a modern revision. It is clearly documented in credible historical sources. We can say with a high degree of certainty that this is the correct way to shoot a longbow.
And so you are using them as if they outrightly say, contradicting yourself massively once again.
They assume that there is a side that is meant to be used, and as a reader, we have to read into the particular steps and nuances to understand what they are visualizing.
This is really dangerous when he says you have to interpret what they mean, because it kind of comes across that he is saying, I need to twist the meanings to suit what my view is. And I'll show you the way that he misinterprets and twists it and stuff. And that's really dangerous because in what I find interesting with all the written sources that he's mentioning, he doesn't reference the written source I shared in my, doing the impossible in medieval archery video. I share a written source, but you know what I said in that written source? It's vague, okay? And so I wasn't using it as categorical evidence, the very thing that NU should have been doing with these written sources, because some of the earliest ones are very vague and don't say what is saying at all. That's how you use written sources like that when it's not clear, and that's what I did in my video, but at least it is a source that might mean shooting on the right, which he happily ignores because it contradicts what he's saying. Now, undoubtedly, NU will be applying a different interpretation to this written source, so it doesn't mean shooting on the right. It's applying a bias. Will he say that it might mean shooting on the right? Because I'll say it might mean either one. It might mean something different. It might mean what he's saying, because I don't know the exact context of the author in what he was writing this, because things get lost in translation. Specifically, the things that he tries to say is said in the sources that he lists. Now let's get into it. Your first source says this: holding the arrow by the middle, he must put it in the bow and there hold it between in two fingers.
This section specifically describes the method of putting the arrow in the bow, which strongly implies a method that can only be done with the arrow on the near side, as putting it on the opposite side does not place the arrow in the bow.
NU tries to say that this passage is saying that the arrow being put in the bow means to put it in between the string and the shaft, and with you being right-handed, that would put the arrow on the left side. The problem is that completely disregards the next part of this passage, which says you there hold it in between two fingers. So by his logic, that passage simply means you hold it there like this. It's not even on the string. But if it's actually meaning you put it in the bow, meaning in the notch, in the string, you put it in the bow by notching it, and then hold it with two fingers, well, guess what? Now we're actually in a position where you're ready to draw the arrow. By NU's own interpretation, it leaves out a step in notching the arrow, which is the actual notching. You put it in the bow and then hold it with two fingers, because he's saying in the bow means between. And so there needs to be another statement on the notching, because putting in doesn't mean to notch. It means weave it through. And then there should be another stage, if NU is right, saying you then notch it on the string and then hold it between two fingers. But it doesn't say that. It simply says you put it in the bow and hold it between two fingers. And so put it in the bow, and there, hold it between two fingers, and look at that, you're ready to draw. Now, on top of just looking at this quote in the broader context to try and get a better understanding of what is actually being said here, well, guess what? The person who translated this also gave greater clarification of what in the bow means in a footnote that Nu seems to have conveniently missed. And he says, to notch. The contextualization of putting in the bow in the actual source that he lists from the person who translated or wrote this says, i.e. to notch. That putting it in the bow means to just notch the arrow in the string. Now, is that what was definitively meant from that passage? I don't know. Okay, I don't know exactly what it's saying because it's not being fully clear, but there does seem to be more indication for the interpretation I've just shared with you, especially with the fact that you're holding it there with two fingers, than what Nu shared. But unlike Nu, I won't say this is what it means, but that is what he is saying. He's saying his interpretation is the correct one in a fairly definitive way. That there's no other way of interpreting this. In the bow means through the bow, which is actually, if you're saying through the bow, you just say through, not in. But anyway, so this was his next written source, and it comes from 1545, again, after the medieval period.
Now, he doesn't specifically talk about knocking, but he does talk about this very specific detail. To look at your shaft head at the loose is the greatest help to keep a length that can be, which thing get hindered with excellent shooting, because a man cannot shoot straight perfectly, except he look at his mark. If I should shoot at a line and not at the mark, I would always look at my shaft end, but of this thing somewhat afterward. The point that people are focusing on the end of the shaft is only feasible if you're shooting with the arrow on the near side, because if the arrow is on the other side, you can't see the end of the shaft. If you had an Asiatic bow, or at least an ambidextrous bow, and you tried to pull the arrow the correct way, you would actually see that it's quite natural to align the eye with the shaft. You can't see the end of the shaft. It's quite natural to align the eye with the shaft.
So Nu outrightly contradicts himself on this point, okay? Forgetting completely that he has said the opposite and showed it pretty easily just by lining up the bow and the arrow down the shaft to his camera, and disregarded all of that to try and prove a point that is ultimately incorrect. But it shows you how bias can affect you to the point where you outright contradict yourself. And this is the thing, this isn't the first time Nu has done this. He did that a lot in my, the first, response videos and backs and forths, but he's done it a lot in this video as well, specifically that no one is saying that it's impossible or this is what they really mean, when you were the one who said it was. And there are other points where you directly contradict yourself. You state something as a categorical and then go on to contradict it by showing it's not a categorical. And so I don't mean this to be mean. This is honest feedback, okay? But mate, if you're contradicting yourself so blatantly like this, you're not good at debate, okay? It would probably be best to just avoid getting in these discussions completely, or at the very least, do more proper research before you dive into the fray and make such blatant, massive errors like this where you are contradicting yourself. Honestly, you would preserve your credibility far more by not getting in over your head and engaging in debates in which you outrightly just spout complete falsehoods, misinformations, and contradict yourself so much. And just to show you on my bow, and don't worry, it's actually not on the string, so there's no risk of it going off when I'm inside, but if I draw the arrow, look, I can line it up with the shaft very easily, and it's awkward because I can't get my arm fully back in my, inside. But when you draw it back fully, okay, the arrowhead becomes so back that it's easy to see, all right? Especially if it's on the side, I can see the arrowhead easily and line it up, not a problem. This next source is much clearer. It doesn't state it explicitly, but I would tend to agree with him that, putting the arrow under the string and over the bow does imply weaving it through the middle and then having the arrow on the left side. The thing is, this written source comes from 1634. That's the 17th century, 300 years after Agincourt. And on top of that, this is one author's opinion. It is not representative of the state of archery in his whole time and location world, all right? And he is still so far removed from the time in which you're trying to apply it. And my goodness, this applies even doubly so with the two sources you list from the 19th century. The fact that you're trying to use this as evidence to how people fought in the medieval period is farcical. But I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to establish a constant tradition of a certain style, Mediterranean grip on the left side of the bow, but you don't establish it with these sources at all. The earliest sources are vague and can be interpreted either way, and the source that can even begin to state, infer which side the arrow is being placed on more accurately comes from the 17th century. And the sources which far more directly say which side the arrow is placed on comes from the modern period, the 19th century. So far from trying to establish a constant tradition of a certain style, your evidence actually indicates far more so that shooting on the left became far more prevalent and accepted and, taught and shared about in the 19th century. The two sources that were the most clear. And that makes complete sense, because when did modern day stationary target archery start to become more prominent and popular as a sport, recreational, part-time, and the resurgence? And I have heard you say, was a comment, that there was a revival in archery. Those were your words, okay? A rediscovery of the pastime and interest. And just like I said before, if you're shooting in this way, I think there are certain advantages that you'll get with sight-based shooting, right, on the left side when you're shooting at a stationary target and your aim is the most pinpoint precision and accuracy that you can attain when you want to actually move it from there to there, all right? But in the medieval context, no, that type of accuracy, sure, would be great if anyone could develop it, but it wasn't needed, nor was it needed in warfare. And in actual fact, you might not have been able to achieve it because most of the arrows of the time were not correctly spined to the draw weight of the bows.
What we can conclude from this is that the assumption that longbow shooters shot from the left side or the near side of the bow is not a modern revision.
Yet the sources you cite actually helps to establish that the standard proper way of shooting, being Mediterranean on the left, is a modern revision. From your own sources, mate.
It is clearly documented in credible historical sources.
Okay. Which one of those sources come from the medieval period? Just what I was saying before. And I think it is very misleading that you say, here are historical sources, and you mentioned it once that they're not from the medieval period, but you're using it in the context to establish that this is how medieval people shot, when it is removed from the medieval period. They don't even come from that time. And by never mentioning it again, not sharing the proper context of where these sources come from, and then just saying, look, we have historical sources that show how archery was done, is very misleading. Because once again, just calling it historical, it's like a unspoken subtle implication that's being, almost implied here that it's all medieval when it's not.
We can say with a high degree of certainty that this is the correct way to shoot a longbow.
No, you can't say that, not from the evidence you've provided, and the fact that you're capable of saying this next thing that you say.
When we are looking for evidence, we need to have evidence which supports the use of the other side using a Mediterranean draw. And that's the thing. There isn't any.
Is astounding. Now, I don't know if you're trying to say there is no written evidence, but you don't say it. You say this as an absolute. There is no evidence. What about the artwork, okay? And you're just ignoring it. There is heaps of evidence for it, and the attempt to just disregard it because, mer archery or mer modern archery is not the way, it's not as effective because reasons that I haven't been able to establish, even when other people are showing that you can shoot just as effectively in terms of what is good medieval accuracy with this style, is so disingenuous, okay? I have shown, Mead Longbows has shown, Thane Thrand has shown, Armin has shown, and Lars Anderson so far has shown, and heaps of people in my comment section have shared that they shoot this way with high poundage bows, have also shown that this is an effective style, it can be done, and because it's effective and can be done, it means that the artistic depictions depicting it have far more chance of being accurate, and your grounds to dismiss it because it can't be done is complete disingenuous bullcrap. And now the attempts to dismiss it based on written evidence is so, again, completely disingenuous and bullcrap because none of them even come from the medieval period. And the two earliest sources don't even say clearly or imply that it was the arrow on the left or the right. It could have been either one. So far, you have nothing in regards to evidence to say that this wasn't done and that Mediterranean style was preferred. And we'll get to your claims about the limitations and the inefficacy of this technique because there are issues there as well, mate. And look, mate, I don't know if you're going to be offended by me making this video again. I'm not attacking you personally, okay? We've talked back and forth, and I think, we could get along, but we have severe and significant disagreements that seem hard to get past. But this isn't a personal attack. I'm attacking your faulty logic, assumptions, and misinformation here.
So, throughout hundreds of years of historical texts covering longbow shooting, not a single one mentioned shooting off the thumb or on the thumb side of the bow.
And out of hundreds of years of artwork, we have many artworks representative from many parts over the medieval period that show the arrow being on the right side. And what's disappointing about this, thanks to your video, I've had people come to me and share in comments and stuff like that, saying that there are written sources from the medieval period saying that you only shoot on the left side. That's the implication that people have been taking from your videos, even though you don't state it explicitly, by trying to shoehorn in as many sources as you can, especially ones that are way outside of the time period, to try and make this veneer, this illusion of all this artistic, I meant to say linguistic, resources to show that people never shot on the right is disingenuous and has been misinforming people because people have literally been taking from that there is written sources from the medieval period saying this was done or this wasn't done, okay? There is not a wealth of textual evidence describing which way people shot in the medieval period. There's a distinct lack and dearth of it. And once again, one of the largest bodies of evidence that we have as to how people shot in the medieval period comes from the artwork. And there has been nothing you've presented so far that contradicts that is in any measure credible.
Thumb draw archery is universally done with the arrow on the right side of the bow.
See, this is one of the places where you contradict yourself. You need to be more aware of what you're saying because you say universally. Thumb draw is universally on the right side of the bow, but then you go on to share an example, like overtly and clearly, blatantly, that there are people doing the thumb draw on the left side, which would imply, well, not imply, just says categorically, that it's not a universal reality that everyone is shooting on the right side with a thumb draw. So don't state universals like that. It makes you look rather silly.
If you look at the modern Mongolian archery competitions, like the Nadam games, we do see a target style where the thumb draw is used and the arrow is on the left side or the near side of the archer. But despite the fact that there are some benefits and advantages, historically, we don't see the evidence support using it in any way.
This part is actually really interesting, and Nus seems to fail to realize that it's a very significant point that works against his own argument. It's an example where a traditional practice of shooting on the right side has been changed in preference to shooting on the left in regards to stationary target archery. That there are inherent advantages when shooting on the left when you're shooting at a stationary target and sighting the arrow with one eye. A historical practice and tradition of shooting on the right, but a modern revision and change to shooting on the left when you're sighting at a stationary target, trying to be as pinpoint accurate as possible. This is actually a clear point of evidence that shows a modern day bias of shooting on the left because of modern day sight-based target archery, and supports my argument as to why shooting on the right side of a medieval longbow might have gone out of practice and was ultimately forgotten.
It's worth noting that traditional and tribal archery styles, which have not been influenced by modern archery, such as the styles used by African hunters, the Hodza tribe for example, they shoot 100-pound bows to hunt elephants. And they use a 3-finger draw, which is a Mediterranean draw, and they all shoot from the left side.
Showing people from other parts of the world that shoot in the way that you think is more common in the medieval period has no reference or influence onto how they actually shot in the medieval period. I know you're trying to say, look, this is more common, people more naturally adopt this style, but if that was really the case, then why are people using other styles in other parts of the world, like classic Asiatic archery? Just because one group of people are more inclined to, do archery a certain way, doesn't mean another group of people are going to have that same inclination. It's a false equivalence.
This segment will provide perspective on why shooting from the opposite side may be less effective than the conventional method.
Well, you've said yourself that it's effective in one of your later videos.
It's a functional technique. I can make it work, and at 10 meters it seemed to be just as accurate with what I was using and what I was shooting at.
And you've made no attempt to correct the record at all. Alright, now we come into what is, honestly I have to say, a very pseudo-scientific, assumption-ridden, bias-driven demonstration of certain limitations in this style. And it's astounding the amount of just flat-out falsehoods he tries to perpetuate here. And he hasn't tried this style very much. It's obvious from watching him, right? Because I've been doing this for, a while now, shooting every second or third day on the right, figuring out all the ins and outs and stuff. And most of the things he says here is just completely incorrect. He tries to establish that there's no way to draw the bow with the arrow not coming off the string, all right, unless you hold up your thumb or overgrip it with your fist. And he then tries to demonstrate it, which is completely riddled with his bias. He has no intention to try and figure out a way to overcome this, right? And the way is just so simple and normal. You can easily draw the arrow without it falling off with the thumb down. And I mean, I'm not, gripping the arrow like this. It's hard to see with my gloves, but when I'm drawing my bow, my fingers are on it like that. This is where my fingers are, okay? I can fully draw it just like that, and it's on the end of my fingers. I'm not gripping it like that. I'm doing that. And for comparison, just take a look at how most longbow archers draw the string. The string usually rests between the last two knuckles on the fingers. And it's harder to see with my gloves on, but that's how I'm shooting every single time, mate. And I showed in my video, you can draw the arrow with it being on the, right side without it falling up, and you don't even need your thumb. Thran showed this as well. Look at this. He's drawing a 130-pound bow. Is his thumb up? Now, you might be saying, oh, he's pinching the arrow and everything like that.
If you want to draw with the arrow on the opposite side of the bow, you basically have to do the opposite of good technique. So we've taught you to use the flat hand and a strong, deep hook. Now you have to show knuckles, clench your fist to keep it on the bowstring. So it's kind of reversing the motion, because you have to pinch the arrow nock and hold it against the bow. And even so, you're relying on the fact that if your thumb isn't there, it's going to fall off. That's basically how I managed it. If you draw the correct hook, the arrow will come off by itself.
How fair and reasonable of you to make assumptions based on someone else's method without actually knowing what they're doing. And so, if you want to see it, okay, look, three fingers, thumb down, drawing, and it's staying on the shaft. If you want me to show that I'm not pinching, I'm going to try and keep my fingers as loose, as possible, so show I'm not pinching the actual arrow, and draw it back. So, oh my goodness, this is so darn easy. I can't believe people are trying to make pseudo-scientific, false claims that it's just complete bull. And so you are making such bold assumptions and stating them as fact that if you don't have the thumb up, the arrow is going to fall off. Or you need to overgrip and pinch the arrow with your hand. When no, I wasn't doing that.
If you ask a typical archer why you wouldn't do this, the answer is quite simple. The arrow will come off the string. And that is the fundamental reason why the left side is used as a conventional method.
Without any way to retain the arrow on the shaft, the arrow will fall off. And that is the fundamental reason, as you say, why the Mediterranean grip is on the left side. Well, if I've just disproven that assertion, okay, that you can easily keep the arrow on the shaft without any detrimental effect on your draw and your aim, your release and your accuracy in a medieval context, by your own logic, there is no fundamental reason to prefer shooting on the left or the right. Now, I actually think there are reasons to prefer one or the other, but not the reasons that you're saying, mate. Now, having said all that, I still like to keep my thumb up, just, in case it might fall off. And then he assumes that that is going to affect the release, that it might hit your thumb when you're releasing.
If your thumb is up, you do heavily risk the fact that the arrow is still going to come off, but it's going to hit the thumb instead. But there's a large degree of deflection because the thumb can interfere with arrow clearance.
Ignoring the fact that if you run into that issue, all you have to do is lower the thumb. Something I do every time, well, I try to do every time I shoot. Sometimes I forget, especially when I'm in a speed shooting video. But when I'm paying attention, okay, it's lowered every single time, not affecting the release or the path of my arrow. But Nu has assumed that if you lower the thumb during the draw or release of the arrow, using a proper and correct draw method with your hand, the arrow will fall off, and you either have to keep the thumb up or cant the bow, which I have disproven in this very video.
Now, many beginning archers have the opposite problem. With the arrow on the near side, they end up flicking the arrow off the string, and it gets really frustrating. The reason this happens isn't because of a flaw in the Mediterranean draw, it's because they're doing it incorrectly.
Yes! That's my point, okay? There's not an inherent problem with the style that's always going to exist. It's just that people aren't doing it properly. You're not doing it properly with your, fumbling attempts of, look, it's falling off when I'm drawing and I'm over clinching it and I'm holding my thumb up and I need it and it's always falling. No! You're just doing it wrong, mate. Why are you seemingly so incapable of applying the same standard of logic to the opposing argument than the view that you're trying to establish? Look, I think we know. I think there's a lot of confirmation bias happening all throughout this video, and it's displayed very blatantly. So at this point in the video, we really reach some pseudoscience, false assumption, just flat out bullcrap, okay? And it's the assumptions things is trying to say about the position of the elbow. And to demonstrate, need to take off my jacket. Like my new shirts though, this is the tunic one over a chainmail print. Looks pretty cool. But alright, so Nu is trying to say that the position of the elbow is going to be detrimental if it's more like facing upways or compared to facing that way. So that way versus that way.
This presents problems in itself. If you are achieving this by turning your wrist, what you are doing is putting your skeletal structure out of position and out of optimal alignment. If we turn the elbow inwards like this, we go from a strong position to a weak position. Now
it's interesting, my shoulder is barely moving and it's not the elbow that you're getting the rotation, it's in the wrist, all right? And with the wrist rotating that way or that way, look at that. My elbow barely moving, okay? It's the slightest tilt, all right? So that's the first massive assumption. The important part in terms of the strain and the weight that's being pushed down is the position of the shoulder. And pay close attention to my shoulder. Is it moving at all in this? My elbow is barely moving at all. I'm canting it this way or that way. And my bone structure is actually aligned in a straight way. There are two bones here, okay? And when you twist it, they have to cross over. And they are not sitting straight from the joint. But when you hold it like this, two bones straight from the joint. I would say that implies better structure, but I'm not going to say it is, all right? I'm not a doctor, neither is Nu, and the fact that he's trying to state it so authoritatively that if you do it this way, you're going to have incorrect structure and that it's a higher chance of injury is just complete pseudoscientific bullcrap, and it becomes hilarious, almost hilarious if it wasn't so blatantly wrong, is when he tries to give the example of the punching. Now he says, when you push people, do you do it like that or do you do it like that, right? And then he goes, how do you punch? You punch like that, you don't punch like that. And this is an example where he really reveals a massive lack of knowledge.
Think about his punching. You don't punch like that. You punch straight like this.
Now, I don't think Nu has done any type of martial arts, especially for him capable of even making a statement like this. I have done martial arts in my past rather extensively, and I have a passionate interest in the subject generally. The subjects of my channel might have given that away. And absolutely you can punch like that. Bruce Lee punched like that a decent portion of the time, but you do it both based on situation. But his famous 3-inch punch was bang, up like that. You can absolutely punch with the fist like this. And like, oh my goodness, the fact that you say you don't punch like that, oh my goodness, you don't know a thing of what you're talking about here, mate. And it also contradicts your logic. You're trying to say they don't punch like this because of bad structure, when in actual fact they do. They can punch like that and have massive impact on their body structure, hitting someone like that, and guess what? They're able to handle it fine because the structure is fine. And so if you want to apply the same logic you are willing to use when you misunderstood how martial arts is actually done, your logic would then actually say, oh, because martial artists actually do punch punch with the fist like that in some instances, that must mean the body structure can handle it fine because we have a tangential example. But I have a feeling you might not accept that as valid evidence where you were willing to propose it as evidence for the contrary moments before. I will get to the claims of injury in regard to this because someone has said that they've injured themselves trying to attempt that, but people who then have been, jumping on that saying, it's proof this is a dangerous style, are missing a very important point of context and the fact that it is no more risk averse or risk likely than the normal conventional way of shooting, okay? By their logic, because people have injured themselves many times when shooting on the other side, that should be too dangerous to test it out as well. Because someone injured themselves, see, it's dangerous. I'll get more into that a bit later on.
It also forces them in a weaker position, which also makes them lift their shoulder upwards and hence to put more strain on the shoulder.
Lift the shoulder upward? Interesting, because I'm not lifting it up any more than I would shooting on the other side at all. Again, just an assumption. It's like trying to make up things out of the air. It seems like it. I'm not saying he's doing it purposely, but it's just all assumptions, like with no actual valid evidence to prove what he's saying. He's just saying this is going to happen if you do this. And then he's also trying to say things that simply people shooting this way aren't doing, like lifting the shoulder like it's coming in higher than it would normally. No, when I shoot on, the difference when I'm shooting this is left, right, I'm not lifting the shoulder in any more measure than the other way of shooting. All right, so I'm tilting it this way. This would be the conventional Mediterranean draw. And honestly, this brings my shoulder in more when it compresses, but it's not raised higher. And then when I do this way, is it getting raised higher than before? No. All that myself and others have said on this subject is that it seems to engage the back muscles more efficiently and it's easier to draw back heavier bows. This has been proven by Thrand. He made a follow-up video in response to the collaboration we did, and his video is brilliant, and check him out, okay? That is a 130-pound war bow, and he can do a full draw doing a reverse tilt with the arrow on the right side, and he can't match that draw when doing it the inverse tilt.
But this makes it easier for me to draw. Now, some people are saying that it's not easier to draw and that me having my arm this way is making a weaker pull and it will hurt my shoulder. But due to the way my back works, and I don't know if everyone's back works the same way, and I'm not trying to argue with anyone, say anybody's doing anything wrong, because I do agree there's some discrepancy in accuracy with this. I'm having to get used to it. But I like it because I'm able to draw a little bit further back on the strong bow that's 130 pounds. And this one's not hinging. It's in mint condition as far as I can tell. There's no cracks or anything in it. Well, I'm being able to get it all the way back. So let's go ahead and give it one more pull here. Okay, I drew all the way back past this here. If I was to thread the arrow through, like NUsensei is saying, and be sure I turn the fletchings, and I try to draw in this manner, let's see what happens. Well, I actually moved it off the bow myself, but anyway, let's go ahead and do it, because I was used to doing it the other way, and yes, I'm pinching in on it. This I want to do the actual correct way. I can't quite get it as far. See if I can try again. I'll try again. I'm not trying to do this to trick my own mind or anything like that. I want to get it right. I can't get it as far back, I'm sorry.
I have found the exact same thing. Longbows has found it as well, but then he realized that he can also do it with it tilting the other way. He just needs to kind of raise it. And so I wonder if it's not an inherent thing of the style, but the style encourages correct back alignment. And once you get it down, you could probably reverse the other way. But for myself and Thrand, still, we can draw back heavier weights with this style, okay? Inverse tilt, leaning back just a tad, just like that. And we can draw back heavier weights compared to when we do, the alternate tilt. Will that work like that for everyone? No idea. It works for us. And so to say that it doesn't work like that at all across the board is false. It's wrong. It's proven wrong by both Thrand and myself. And one of the most disingenuous arguments people are trying to say, which is really proposing a negative, right? You can't prove like this, is that, oh, you won't notice the fatigue, you know, when you do this, okay? The injury is going to happen subtly, like rotator cuff injury or something like that, that your rotator cuff is going to be injured after long-term use of this, and you won't notice it at first. What utter bullcrap, okay? The shoulder is in the same position when you lean that way or that way or that way or that way, right? The shoulder's in the same position. The same amount of stress and pressure is going to be the same, whether it's on the inside, outside. It's about the back muscles and the drawing of the arm and stuff that is giving us greater efficiency in this style. Come at me with a doctor who might actually say something like that, not just random pseudoscientific assumptions that you made. And by the way, I have injured my rotator cuff in this shoulder before. It is very sensitive. I know when I'm overstraining it because it tells me instantly from a previous injury. Not a single hint of that shooting this way, okay?
And comparing historical archers who used heavy bows across the world, talk about Chinese archery, talk about Japanese archery, European archery, African tribal archery, the form is nearly identical. So there is a conventional way to shoot heavy bows.
Yes, there is a conventional way to shoot heavy bows, okay? But that doesn't mean it's the only way, all right? Thrand literally pulled back a 130-pound bow. That means that this is a viable method to draw a heavy war bow. He didn't injure himself, and in actual fact, he said he felt less strain overall shooting this way.
I can't get it as far back, I'm sorry. That's me trying to keep my hands straight, like NUsensei said, and draw back. It is hurting me worse in my back. I can feel the strain more, and that's with my arm this way.
That actually implies that there is less likelihood to injure yourself shooting this way than the other way. I won't say that definitively, we don't know. What I will say is that shooting heavy bows has a chance for injury no matter what you do, and you just need to be careful, okay? When you be careful, risk of injury becomes very, very low. And I said this in my other video. I'm not saying it's impossible to injure yourself. You always have to be careful. Don't push yourself too hard. Like for myself, I'm not shooting 2 days in a row. I'm always taking at least 1 to 2 days break. And if I'm still feeling sore in my muscles, I'll take an additional 3rd day break before I'm shooting again to make sure I'm not overstraining myself. That's how you do it carefully. And you feel it out. You make sure, like, your body can tell you what's happening pretty quick. And I'm not saying it's impossible to injure yourself, especially when you're pushing yourself too much, like what's happened with Jack over on Historical Archery. Yeah, if you push yourself too much, especially trying to draw a 170-pound bow in the same session that you're trying a different style, you might have a chance to injure yourself, but more on that later. But the fact that it is more inherently dangerous is not proven at all. And in actual fact, from people actually testing this responsibly, safely, we are finding that it works pretty darn good, and there's less strain overall. And in addition, Nu is cherry-picking here in his examples, trying to establish that you only shoot heavy bows in one way. And I find it interesting that he's willing to use historical artwork to try and establish that there is a very standard, universal way to shoot heavy bows.
We can't assume that the artists necessarily were familiar with the intimacies and the intricacies of archery.
Unless it's in support of your own argument, apparently. But what we see in some of the artworks with the arrows depicted on the right side, look at their stance and posture. They're leaning back. In fact, it's the same type of stance and posture that myself and Thrand are doing. And there are additional examples of people slightly leaning back or even canting the bow that way with the arrow on the other side.
Now, all these things can be overcome. I'm not saying they can't be overcome, but I am saying they need to be overcome.
Yeah, absolutely, most of these things can be overcome because most of them aren't even issues in the first place. You've just made up stuff saying that these are problems. Well, no, I've already shown on so many instances, disproven you. Or you say the arrow fall off unless the thumb is up, or you have to pinch it, or you have to overdo it, or all these things like that, or the rotation of the elbow, or, you know, it's bad structure, which is why people like all of it. There's such constant misinformation and falsehoods in this part.
Over thousands of years of archery progress and development, we've acquired the most effective and optimal methods. That's why we can accept that in European archery or Western archery, with the Mediterranean draw, the arrow goes on the left side.
And one of the biggest errors with Nu's kind of assumptions in this video is that he assumes that the standard way of shooting is the best way because it was developed over thousands of years of trial and error. And that I call out as complete bull, because if that was the case, there'll be no point in innovating things that have been developed over thousands of years, because we all know how effective traditional certain old school martial arts are against MMA, don't we? But by that logic, these traditional martial arts should be the best because they were developed over thousands of years, when no, tradition tends to instill certain dogmatic, ideas, preferences, opinions, and styles that never get challenged, and ultimately ineffective things become the standard. Now, in regards to archery, I'm not saying it's ineffective in the context in which it's used. I think Mediterranean on the left side probably is still the best for target Olympic stationary archery, but not in regards to warfare archery. There's a use of practice that ended quite a long time ago, and to say that that method was then developed and improved upon when we stopped using it in that context is completely disingenuous and false. Just because most archers shoot this way and have been shooting this way for so long in modern day target archery does not mean it's the best method for warfare archery.
And like I said before, you can make it work, you can force it to work, but everything comes as a compromise. The arrow will want to come off if you execute a good technique. So you have to compromise the hook by having a clench fist. But the arrow will come off anyway at full draw, so you have to tilt the bow. But tilt the bow, your elbow's in a weak position, so you lean your body back, and the arrow will come off anyway, so you have to lift your thumb up, which interferes with the arrow, so you have to use katra. It's a layer upon layer of extra steps, when the reality is, we've known for centuries that you put the arrow on this side and you literally have none of those problems.
You're trying to say that there are more problems with shooting on the right as opposed to the left, when there's just as many from my own experience. The arrow still might fall off when you're shooting on the left side. So when you go up to war archery levels, you need to adjust your posture and figure out a whole different, stance to do higher poundage bows. See, my point here is this: you're going to run into problems when you try and shoot on either side, and different techniques help overcome them. And just because one side is more established and you know all the different ins and outs to get a smoother release and stuff like that, doesn't mean those are once problems that needed to be figured out and overcome to figure out how to do it properly on the left side, just like the same things you need to do when shooting on the right. I have not found a greater number of challenges to be overcome to be competent when shooting on the right when shooting on the left, because there are still inherent complications that you will get when shooting on the left as opposed to the right. For instance, when you're nocking the arrow. You mentioned this from one of your sources and even in your own demonstration, that when you're trying to weave the arrow through the bow, there is a tendency to actually hit the back of the arrow and mark it. And you have a historical source mentioning that this happened as well. It's not an old historical source, but it shows that this is a problem that you need to overcome. Well, guess what? That problem doesn't even exist when you shoot on the right, because you just have to place it on it like that. And also, when you're weaving it through, there's a chance you can stab your damn hand with the head of the arrow when you weave it through like that. You have to bring it back and weave it through like that. Does that problem exist on the right? No, because you just lift it, put it on like that, and the head of the arrow is away from your hand the whole time. And so this is one example of a problem that exists on the left side that does not exist on the right. And so if you're trying to say that the right has more problems to be overcome than compared to the left, that is bullcrap, because there are advantages and problems you don't even need to deal with when shooting on the right compared to the left. It balances out. But towards the end of all these physical demonstrations, you're trying to say you can force it to work by working through all these limitations. That applies on the outside. You can force that. People have been forcing that to work, dealing with the inherent problems that exist in that style, but you're trying to establish that, therefore, it's just easier to learn on the left and the right, when no, okay? It's just more traditionally established that that is the proper way to do it. When you actually break it down, test it properly for yourself, as myself and many others have found, it is viable, there it is just as effective, and any problems that you run into are no greater than the problems you run into when shooting in a different method. You just work through them.
You can make it work, you can force it to work, but everything comes as a compromise.
No, you're trying to strawman the case by grossly misrepresenting the style, making so many false assumptions across the board.
So why go for the most difficult method, which has no perceivable benefit over the conventional draw, and that there is no practical reason why someone would choose to shoot the opposite way with a Mediterranean draw?
No perceived benefit over the conventional draw? Well, I pointed out some already, pokey slip through and everything like that. And then he goes on to say, and if you're gonna say, speed archery, and Ian tries to dismiss it that no one who shoots a 100-pound like bow is gonna try and shoot with a faster rate of fire. which is bull. It's a disingenuous dismissal of an inherent massive benefit that you get from shooting on the right. There is less movements needed to get that arrow on the bow and to draw and loose. No matter how fast you can get by shooting on the left with a quiver, all right, arrows from a quiver, it seems like you will always be faster when shooting on the right. And to dismiss that is simply ignoring the reality of the situation. It's physics, okay? Hand movements. Look at it. There are absolutely advantages to this style, and I'm not going to say it's universally better in every situation. I've admitted many times that I think there are other cases where it might be beneficial to have it on that side, like in target archery and stuff. But there are absolutely advantages to this style and disadvantages that you don't have to deal with when shooting this way. And to say there's not is false. It's wrong.
With all that said, I think that the historical and practical evidence strongly suggests that the conventional method of shooting Mediterranean with the arrow on the near side of the bow is the correct method.
And with all this said, you didn't actually provide any real historical evidence for your case that dates from the medieval period. And you didn't prove anything from a practical standpoint looking at your straw man kind of set up demonstrations and false assumptions.
I think that our experimentation with the alternate Mediterranean draw may be more of a modern fiction, which we're trying to find a place for in historical sources rather than letting the history speak for itself.
Oh, that's annoying because that's bull as well. This isn't me picking up a bow and saying, I like shooting on the right, so I'm going to try and justify it with historical sources. I literally started to explore this method because of the historical sources. If it wasn't in the medieval artwork, I wouldn't have even bothered trying, okay? I'm interested in history. I saw the artwork, saw that they were doing it in a different way, and wanted to find out if it was practical or possible to do it. So this is again a completely false statement, setting up a straw man that these are people who just want to shoot on the right, trying to justify it historically. No! Not at all! This is me trying to do experimental archaeology to find out if the historical artwork might actually be valid. I started with the artwork and that led me to the style. I didn't start with the style and then try to shoehorn it into the interpretation of history. And so those are the major points of news video, and from beginning to end it is just filled with misinformation and falsehood. Like, it's astounding, okay? Now, he's made a follow-up video where he actually shows you can shoot this way. Again, he didn't state anything that he was wrong in anything like that, but it's a viable technique, and he didn't explore lowering the thumb either and everything, because you can actually improve upon the ways that he was doing it. And then he's also made another video in response to another YouTuber who tried this out and has hurt his shoulder. And so Nu made a video stating, effectively, I was right. He was saying, I don't really want to try and say that I'm right. I'm more concerned about, people injuring themselves and stuff like that. And he really is trying to push the idea that it is this style that caused it, willfully ignoring what Jack has actually said on the matter. Let me quote to you his reply to my comment on his video. I think it was one of those injuries that happens. Considering that I have been pulling heavy bows without rest for a while, I think these are important factors to consider as well. I do not intend to blame it on this cradle draw, but I think it was the ultimate push that popped it. And what a really fair way to analyze it. So thumbs up, Jack, but of course this isn't stopping Nu and others from just dogpiling on this thing, saying this is proof it's inherently dangerous and everything like that. When in the same session that Jack was trying this style, he was also trying to, or attempting to shoot a massively powerful bow. And you honestly think that either attempting this before shooting a different style or attempting it after having shot that different style isn't going to either increase the likelihood of injury or make the injury worse when trying it? That bow was insanely big that he was trying to pull. And he himself said that he didn't think it was because of this style it popped, that it was more kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. He'd been drawing and doing this for a long time without rest, and he overstrained himself, so of course that's going to increase the likelihood of injury, especially if you end up trying a different style. Now what's interesting about this, Thrand has tried this on a 130-pound bow, did it not a problem, and it was easier for him than doing it another way. So if you're going to try it, just be careful, okay? I trust you guys aren't idiots. I'm not an idiot either. And you just be careful when you're doing it. Don't push yourself or overstrain yourself, and you're going to be good. Now, I have a feeling that my critics would really jump on that and say, see, Shad doesn't care about people, and that is promoting something that will cause injury, when I am sharing something from my direct personal experience. I've tried this, okay? And I've seen other people try it with heavy bows. I was able to pull back a 100-pound bow with this style where I wasn't able to do in other styles, okay? And for me, for Thrand, for me, longbows, this style worked great with heavy bows. With Thrand, he was able to pull it back further than he could other ways. So from my own experience and many experiences of others, and this is including Jack from Historical Archery because his experience has many things that need to be considered. It isn't a fair test to see if this is actually more straining on someone than not. There is no reason for me to assume that this is more dangerous than shooting heavy bows the conventional way. There is always a risk of injury, and there is a greater risk of injury with truly weird, if you're going to be making up and trying to just pull it back with your neck or something, of course that's going to have a greater risk. But this one specifically, I have been given no valid reason or evidence to believe that this is inherently dangerous, okay? And from my own direct experience, it works better. So that is the evidence in my own experience that I'm drawing this conclusion from. If this style does use a different kind of muscle set, and I don't know if it does, if that little twist is using a different muscle set, or it actually might just align the bones and muscles differently and it's using the same ones, and so I don't know, okay? But if it uses a different muscle set and you've trained up those muscles to draw a heavy bow and then you try and draw the same weight of bow in a different style that might use a different muscle set or most of the same muscles with only a couple of different ones, and those couple of different muscles haven't been developed for that pound of bow, well then you might be running into trouble. So if you're going to be trying this style, it might be good to start with low weights and build yourself up, just like what I'm doing. But that's not a universal case. Three-hand was able to jump to a 130-pound bow right away. And it's not proven if it uses a different muscle set either. These are just things to be aware of. If you're going to try it out, you're smart, be careful, okay? But so far for me, it works brilliantly, and I love it. And oh boy, what a lengthy video that was, but there was a lot to go through. And can you see the amount of misinformation that's being spread everywhere about this? And like, why? Why are people so vehemently against it? And the fact that they're so willing to misrepresent the argument, strawman it, and just make up bullcrap about it is astounding. What's causing that? And I can only conclude it's in defense of tradition and bias, and that they don't want to accept new things. It's one thing to be skeptical, but it's a whole nother thing to just make up stuff in opposition to it and not acknowledge the reality of what is being done, the evidence that is being proposed. Like people are making up, it's always going to hit the wrist. They're saying every time it's going to hit the wrist, and that it's not aligned properly, greater risk of injury, inherently inaccurate, going to fall. So much bull. The process of logic has literally been that it's impossible to even draw the arrow without it falling off. That was disproven. And then people have been trying to say that no one ever said it was impossible because it was disproven so categorically that anyone who has that assumption previously looks like they have a lot of egg in their face. They do look rather silly for being so vehemently convinced that it was impossible to even draw the arrow with it on that side. And so no one ever said it's impossible. We're just saying that it's impractical. Again, shifting the goalposts. And now that we're showing that it's just as practical and viable, they're trying to say, no, all right, it's impractical and not as effective on heavy war bows. Just shifting goalposts again and again and again. Never admitting that they were originally wrong in their assertions, and then actually attacking people, belittling them and ridiculing them because they don't have a solid argument to actually come back on to try and challenge the evidence and logic proposed. They become the worst type of authoritarian, snobbish elitists that drive people away from the community, away from the interests, just for the sake of their own bias. It's pathetic, okay? That's why I called these arguments childish and pathetic, because they come back at you saying, no, you're stupid, you're a condescending tit, literally the dumbest thing I've ever seen anyone try with a bow, without actually giving an argument. Just, character attacks ad hominem because they don't know how to argue. Very disappointing, and it damages the interest that people can have in this thing. Because seriously, why are you taking it so personally, okay? This is just a couple of guys trying to explore historical archery to see what can be done and having fun while doing it. So stop sniffing your own farts and being in an echo chamber circle jerk, and just let people enjoy what they enjoy. So anyway, these are things I needed to address, and look, it's an unfortunate thing, but hopefully I've also been able to contradict many of the lies that have been perpetuating in an attempt to try and challenge what is actually potentially a really cool, valid historical method of archery. So if you've come all this way to the very end, thank you for watching, guys. I really appreciate your support. You guys are the very best. So once again, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and of course I hope to see you again. So until then, farewell.